Welcome to the Frontlines. I am so thrilled to have you here for this explainer because study block 3 of the Toronto Shelter Standards, well, this is where the rubber really meets the road. It's where theoretical empathy meets concrete operational liability. Look, if you're stepping onto the shelter floor as a future human services professional, you're going to need more than just good intentions. You need deep structural sector competency. So I'm going to be your coach today. We're going to walk through the very real, very rigorous standards that dictate how we operate, how we manage risk, and ultimately how we protect human dignity every single shift. Let's get into it. All right, here's our game plan for the shift. First, the reality check. Second, procedural discharges and restrictions. Third, logistical basic needs. Fourth, low barrier harm reduction. And finally, we'll wrap things up with the coach's corner, interview readiness. Starting with Section 1, the reality check, municipal compliance on the front lines. Before we even talk about how to help a client, we really need to understand our structural boundaries. Compassion is absolutely vital, sure, but out on the floor, it has to be backed by rigorous municipal compliance. You aren't just making things up as you go. You can see how the City of Toronto meticulously planned out these staggered rollout dates. They dictated exactly when specific mandates, like providing secure storage for medications or ensuring a gender-neutral, barrier-free washroom, officially came into effect. Our funding, our operating agreements, and our professional liability all hinge entirely on strictly adhering to these timelines. Moving right along to Section 2, procedural discharges and restrictions, the hard lines. Now, drawing hard administrative boundaries is not a failure of empathy. It's actually a vital mechanism that protects both the client and the broader shelter community. I want you to burn this first core pillar into your mind, procedural discharges and restrictions. Specifically, we need to deconstruct the sheer administrative gravity of Section 8.4 in the standards. Listen, when you have to remove someone from a bedded program, you are dealing with literally one of the most serious administrative actions you can take. Let's walk through the mandatory procedural sequence. Eviction from a shelter is, legally and ethically, always a last resort. Before you even get to this point, you should have heavily documented your attempts to de-escalate or divert the situation. And once you do reach this point, you cannot act alone. You absolutely must secure approval from the executive director or their designate. Then, the decision and the specific lift dates have to be documented in the Shelter Management Information System, SMSIS, in real time. You've got to inform the client both verbally and in writing, ensuring they fully understand their mandatory right to appeal. And finally, you must facilitate a referral and offer transportation assistance to another shelter. You can't just wish them luck and lock the front door. So the crucial takeaway here is that you cannot just restrict a client on a whim because you had a difficult shift. The specific, documented behaviors listed here are the only legal grounds for such severe administrative action. Whether it's a threat of violence or a continued refusal to engage in a service plan, your documentation has to clearly map to these exact criteria. No exceptions. All right, Section 3, logistical basic needs, the human rights. This is our second core pillar, logistical basic needs. Once a client is safely admitted, we have to talk about the logistics of actually keeping them alive and well. Nutrition, hygiene, accessible space, these aren't just nice little perks. They are fundamental human rights. Navigating these basic needs tests your ability to ensure client dignity and equitable design on a daily basis. This is way more than just handing out blankets, you know? It's about executing a highly structured logistical operation. Notice the stark difference between standard logistics and our mandatory accommodations. At a baseline, every single client gets a minimum of 3.5 square meters of personal space and standard meals aligned with Canada's food guide. We also need 1 toilet per 15 clients. But as a professional, you are liable for the accommodations. You must ensure there is a barrier-free, gender-neutral washroom available. You have to ensure vegetarian proteins are an option at every single meal and snack, and that special cultural or medical diets are strictly accommodated. Now, let's see how this builds when we accommodate highly specific needs. Standard clients have scheduled mealtimes, simple enough. But if you have a pregnant or breastfeeding client, the standards radically shift. You are mandated to provide mealtime flexibility, extra snacks, and crucially, safe storage for expressed breast milk. And here is a massive operational detail that you cannot get wrong. That breast milk must be kept in a strictly separate refrigerator, far away from any client medications. Jumping into Section 4, Low Barrier Harm Reduction, Clinical Frameworks. Which brings us to our third and final core pillar, low barrier harm reduction.
Now we have to address the immense daily complexities of health, medication, and substance use on the floor. I am repeating this mandate because it's absolutely fundamental. Toronto shelters operate under a low-barrier, abstinence-exempt model. Period. Your floor must reflect this reality at all times. I need you to understand this definition down to your bones. Our clinical framework is all about safety. It's about meeting people exactly where they are. We do not force clients into abstinence in order to receive a bed. Our strategies must be practically applied, completely non-judgmental, and fundamentally non-coercive. Train your eyes to look for these visual markers. When you walk onto a compliant shelter floor, you should instantly see these operational realities. Accessible, safer injection and smoking equipment. Sharps containers that are physically secured against tampering. You must see secure, separate storage for all client medications. And let me be very clear about this next part. This absolutely includes hormones for transgender clients, which are life-saving and must never be confiscated or treated as prohibited substances. And finally, naloxone distribution and overdose response training must be ubiquitous. Which brings us to Section 5. Welcome to the Coach's Corner, Interview Readiness. Take a deep breath. We've covered the core pillars, and now it's time to simulate the pressure of a real-world interview panel. Let's see if you're really ready for the floor. Imagine sitting across from the hiring managers. The room is quiet. They lean in and ask, walk us through how you handle a client who is actively under the influence but needs access to their medication or meals. How do you handle this incredibly common, high-stakes scenario without violating their rights or the shelter standards? Here is your operational slam dunk answer. You start by stating crystal clear that admission and access to basic needs are not based on substance use. If a client is under the influence, you provide a dedicated private resting space for them until the effects subside. You always allow them access to their securely stored prescribed medications or hormones. You never, ever confiscate them. The only exception here is if there is an immediate severe safety risk, at which point you'd consult a healthcare professional. You protect the client, and you protect the standard. Okay, let's hit you with the second panel question. They want to test your grasp of procedural evictions and operational liability. What administrative steps must be taken before a service restriction can legally be enforced? Lock this answer into your memory and deliver it with total confidence. You tell them it is a highly documented last resort. It requires leadership sign-off from the executive director. The specific infraction and the lift dates must be entered into SMIS in real time. You must inform the client verbally and in writing of their right to appeal. And finally, you have to offer a referral and transportation to another shelter to ensure they aren't just left stranded. Let's bring this all together with this foundational standard from Section 5. Ultimately, every logistical choice you make, every administrative boundary you draw, every meal you serve, and every harm reduction tool you provide must be deeply rooted in trauma-informed care. You are prioritizing the client's safety, their choice, and their control in a system where they often feel like they have absolutely none. Which leaves me with one final question for you today. Are you ready to step up, balance strict operational liability with radical empathy, and genuinely elevate the standard of care? The Playbook gives you the rules for sure, but only you can determine the culture of your shelter floor. When you step out there, are you just going to be enforcing compliance, or will you be redesigning what dignity looks like in a crisis? Study the standards, know your pillars, and I'll see you on the floor.